Have you fallen head over heels in love with the amazing jade plant and want to grow as many of them as you possibly can without breaking the bank? Well, you're in the right place. My name is Madison from All About Gardening, and today we're going to look at how to propagate jade plants in 2 easy ways. The scientific name for the jade plant is Crassula ovata, and they are native to my part of the world, South Africa, and actually from this particular province we're in right now, KwaZulu-Natal, and also from the Eastern Cape. This big part here grows outside in my garden in full sun. You can see jade plants in almost all my neighbors' gardens and all across the province. But in most parts of the world, they are actually considered houseplants. Why is that? Well, here in KwaZulu-Natal, we have a subtropical climate, and as many houseplant lovers already know, most houseplants come from the tropics. They love warmth, they love high humidity, and they cannot stand the cold. Much like humans, which is why we choose to grow them indoors. But the jade plant is slightly different from other houseplants you may have in your collection in that it is a succulent. That means it needs slightly more direct sunlight than the rest of your houseplants and cannot stand being overwatered. This needs very little water as it holds most of its water in its thick leaves, so you can leave the pot to dry out almost completely before watering again. Other than those slight differences, they make great candidates for houseplants. There are many reasons why members of the houseplant community have become obsessed with jade plants. First and foremost, they are incredibly easy to grow. Once you plant them, especially once they've matured, they essentially take care of themselves. They are also one of the few succulents that can handle a little bit of shade without facing too many negative consequences. You may notice the spaces between the leaves stretching and growing a bit, but they still look great even when they aren't given their full 6 hours of sun a day. Like I said before, they also need very little watering. So for all my fellow underwaterers out there, you don't need to worry about these plants. You can leave the pot to dry out almost completely before watering again. And one of my favorite benefits is that these plants are incredibly easy to propagate. You have 2 choices when propagating. You can propagate from a single leaf, which takes a little bit longer, or you can propagate from an entire branch, which will give you a fully fledged plant in a shorter amount of time. But for people with smaller jade plants, propagating from an entire branch may not always be possible, in which case single leaves are your best bet. You really don't need much to get started on your jade propagating journey. The first tool you need to look for is a pair of sharp and clean pruning shears, and then a couple of plastic pots with the amount depending on how many leaves or branches you want to propagate. I've just used recycled plastic pots from the garden. A reminder to always save any pots you get that your houseplants come in after repotting to use for propagating. The next thing you'll need to consider is your propagating mix. If you already have some on hand, succulent and cacti potting soil works great for this purpose, but I always like to mix my own. So I'm going to bring in this bucket here and I'm going to combine equal parts coconut coir and perlite. First, I'm going to start by adding some coconut coir or coco peat to the bucket. Now this material is made from coconut fibers and it performs the same function as peat moss, but is a slightly more sustainable material with no negative effects. I'm going to add 3 handfuls of this mixture, and then we're going to add 3 handfuls of perlite. Now perlite is an amazing material. It's made from volcanic glass that's heated up and expanded to form these very light white rocks. You should see this in most houseplant potting soils. If you take a look at anything you've bought from a nursery or from any store, you should see these in the soil. Now, the function of these is to improve drainage. And because we're propagating succulents and houseplants, drainage is essential to prevent rotting in the roots and to stop the stem from rotting before it develops any roots. So we've got equal parts coconut, coir and perlite in here. I'm just going to mix that up. Now instead of perlite, if you don't have any, you can also use river sand, which is closer to the succulent and cacti potting mixes that you'll find, but as perlite is a drainage material, it serves the same purpose. Now that that's mixed, I'm going to set it aside. and come back to this stunning plant over here. Now, like I said before, you have two options when propagating. You can propagate from stem cuttings or from single leaves. Stem cuttings turn into full plants much quicker, and when you plant them, they already sort of look like full plants, so you can fit them into your houseplant collection without them looking out of place. But if you take a look at this plant here, I wouldn't have many more options for stem cuttings. As you can see, I've made a few cuts on this plant to propagate already. So taking too many cuttings from one plant will make it look unbalanced and out of shape. It can also put it into shock. So in that case, it's better to use single leaves. There's tons of options for single leaves here, and they'll always put out more. So if you want to grow lots of jade plants, single leaves are your best bet. When choosing a stem to propagate from, the first thing you want to look for is any signs of damage or disease. If you take a cutting that's damaged, it's unlikely to develop roots, and any potential problems will only spread to the new plant that you're growing. So I'm going to take a look at this branch here. It's relatively long enough to anchor into the soil, and it's got lots of healthy green growth. So I'm going to get my clean and sharp shears, which is essential for propagating, and I'm going to make a cut just below a node on the plant. Now the node is the point where the leaves grow from, and this is where your root growth will come from. So it's important, if you see here, to cut just below these lines on the stem, and make sure you don't cut too close to the node to damage it, but close enough to facilitate root growth. When propagating from single leaves, the starting point is the same. Make sure you avoid any leaves with any signs of damage or disease, as these are unlikely to root. What you want to look for is a relatively large leaf. It should be green, it should be plump, and attached to a healthy stem. So I'm going to look at this one here. Now the important part when removing these is to try and get as much of the node to come with it as possible. So instead of just picking it off and leaving it like that, you're going to peel it off from the bottom. You can twist it, but sometimes that part of the stem doesn't come with it. So I just peel it off from the bottom, pull it down, and there is your single leaf ready for propagating. The next step is not particularly fun for impatient gardeners like me, but you will need to leave your single leaves or your stem cuttings out on a piece of newspaper or on your kitchen counter for a couple of days to allow the ends to seal. You can plant them straight like this, but the likelihood of the ends rotting is very high, meaning any chances of root growth will completely disappear. So you want to leave your stem cuttings out for about a week to seal over, and single leaves seal much faster in 2 to 3 days. After about a week, you should be ready to start planting. I've got some cuttings that I cut about a week ago here, and you can see that the ends are white and sealed over, and I've also got some single leaves that we're going to plant. So I'm going to set up my pots to plant both at the same time and bring in my propagating mix. So you want to fill the pot up almost to the top, but not quite, so that when you water, it doesn't spill over. And for anyone with a greenhouse, this is why I love these greenhouse tables, so that when you make a mess, which I always happen to do, it simply goes through and onto the floor. So I've filled up the pot for the stem cutting, and now I'm gonna fill up the pot for the leaf cutting. Before you actually get to planting, what we need to do is pre-moisten the soil. This is not essential, you can always water afterwards, but it does help settle any big air pockets that might be in these pots, and also means you won't have to water and disturb the single leaf or the stem cutting after planting. It just anchors them better in the soil from the start. So I'm going to grab my watering can and just water these until water comes out from the drainage hole at the bottom. You can also see how quickly this water drains through, indicating we have the perfect consistency for propagating. With the soil pre-moistened, you are ready to start planting. So for the stem cutting, you're going to take your finger, stick it into the soil, not too deep, and just wide enough to fit the stem inside. You're going to grab the stem and gently lower it into the soil, holding it up so that any leaves don't touch the base of the soil, as any moisture will cause them to rot. Then you're going to fill in around the gaps and press down very gently. Don't compact the soil too much because this will prevent drainage, just enough to anchor the cutting in place. For single leaves, the process is much the same. You're going to take your pot and your single leaf and gently press it into the soil until it's anchored at a slight angle. Now this angle allows the growth at the base of the leaf to emerge upright, rather than planting it upright and having the growth emerge from the sides, but it also keeps the leaf off the soil to prevent it from rotting. Now, if the leaf keeps falling over, if you've got a smaller one or one that's not really the right shape, you can always use a toothpick, stick it in the soil and use it to hold it up. But if your leaf is thick enough, it should stand on its own. Now that these are planted, I'm going to move them to a warm spot inside my house to facilitate root growth. You need to keep the soil lightly moist, not overly saturated, because that will rot the stems, until new growth develops. For stem cuttings, because they grow quicker, it'll take about a month or so. And for single leaves, you'll see new growth in probably 2 to 3 months emerging from the base of the leaf. Once new growth appears, you can limit your watering. The soil doesn't need to stay moist, and you can treat them like you would any other jade plants in your house. It really is that easy to grow as many of these plants as you want to, or as many as you can fit in your home, especially when propagating from single leaves, because the supply, as you can see, is almost endless. If you have some propagating mix on hand, it doesn't take very long, and all you need to do is plant them up, keep them watered, and wait for new growth. If you want to find out more about propagating these plants, you can take a look at our website, allaboutgardening.com, where there's a full rundown of the process and some information on how to care for them once they are fully grown. You can also check out our other YouTube videos and stay tuned for more content coming up.